Next up, Dan Shulman.
Hello, everybody. I kneel with Colin Kapernick. I don't stand with Jerry Jones. One of the topics is the NFL a microcosm of society? Well, it is, but it's also a microcosm of slavery. This is a plantation organization. It is owned entirely by white people. The management, general managers are almost entirely white. The coaches are almost entirely white, despite the well-demonstrated success and abilities of the occasional African-American coaches. The players are, of course, overwhelmingly African-Americans. They are, it is the only professional sports league that I'm aware of where the contracts are not fully guaranteed, which means that they are essentially subject to being cut, shipped out, separated from their friends, just as slaves were separated from their families without notice or concern about what happens to them. Also, they have been intentionally kept in ignorance, in the dark, about the medical effects and consequences of their profession and the sport they are playing, just as slaves were not permitted to become literate under slavery. So we're at a time where thankfully, the spirit of Tommy Smith and John Carlos has been revived. There is no need for anybody to respect a flag that doesn't respect them. Injustices also can't be remedied if they're not recognized, and kneeling is one way to make that happen. They also can't be fixed unless people act on the injustices that they recognize and that are now apparent. Now, I am from Minneapolis, Minnesota. I've been a trial lawyer here for 50 years. 25 years of that, I've been involved in school desegregation litigation against the state, and I am currently. I should also say that I and the rest of our family have known James and Robinson since they were friends of our daughters in middle school, and we think the world of them. Now, how bad are things here? Why do I say a well-deserved black eye? This is a highly segregated community. It has the 11th largest achievement gap in the country. It has the 9th largest earning disparities between black and white. It has the 6th largest employment disparities, 2nd largest poverty and home ownership gaps. The black poverty rate is 5 times higher than for white residents. A quarter of black residents own their own homes, compared with 3/4 of whites. Only 57% of black students in Minneapolis and 70% of black students in St. Paul complete high school in 4 years, compared with around 85% of their white peers. Black youth represent 11% of the under 18 population, but more than 30% of those detained in the juvenile justice system. There is a website, an organization called Wallet Hub, which does a regular report ranking states on racial progress. In 2016, Minnesota's overall rank was 51. That includes the District of Columbia. Gap in median annual income, 50. Gap in home ownership rate, 50. Gap in poverty rate, 49. Gap in residents with at least a high school diploma, 51. Gap racial progress rating, 50 out of 51. 2020, the most recent Wallet Hub racial progress, Minnesota racial integration, rank 45. Median annual income, 49. Home ownership gap, 48. Poverty rate gap, 48. High school diploma gap, 50. Racial progress overall, 45. That is despicable. So, where does one start? I can tell you where I start, and that is with the children. The schools are highly segregated in the Twin Cities, both black and white. There is disproportionate discipline and punishment of children of color. Segregation in these schools destroys life outcomes, and that is well documented in work by Professor Rucker Johnson of the University of California at Berkeley, who also happens to be from Minnesota and is the son of the former superintendent of schools when I filed my first desegregation case in 1995. I'm now in another desegregation case against the state. We've been mediating it for over a year. It all started when Keith Ellison was elected Attorney General, the first Muslim Attorney General in the state of Minnesota. James Cook is co-counsel with me in that case. We are making progress. We are going to desegregate these schools. We are going to bring equity to the school system, and we are going to create opportunity and better life outcomes for these kids, or else we will go and kick their ass in court the way we've been doing since the case started.
Daniel, you're out of time. Thank you so much for your contribution. Okay, we've got Adante Pointer. I think you need to unmute. I can come back to you. Tommy Hoffman. You need to unmute, Tommy. We can't hear you.
Better?
Yep.
Okay. I knew with Cap, mostly this thing struck me as very similar to the Tommy Smith and John Carlos 68 Olympics, but for a little different take. The message was kind of hijacked. All they remember about Tommy Smith and John Carlos is the Black Power salute, but they actually protested Black poverty, Black pride, blue-collar working, lynchings, all with things they were wearing and things they did when they were standing to get their medals. Cap's the same thing. He spoke out when they asked him in the news conference that he was refusing to stand for a country that oppressed Black people and people of color. He also said there are bodies in the street and people getting paid leave and getting away with murder. Those are quotes. So this reaction as far as standing is just a reaction of protest, which is typical in the media of any type of protest. It's a white reaction to a Black protest, which is how things actually get moved along. The protests actually are in the eye of the beholder. You know, he's entitled to stand, kneel, whatever he wants to do. The other thing that's interesting about that is that since the Cap protest in 2016, there's been a shift in America. And after seeing all the videos, you know, George Floyd and everything else, it would be interesting to see how his kneeling would be dealt with today into the climate as opposed to how it was then. I think the outcome would be a lot different. Another thing is that a lot of people are not aware of is that Cap didn't make this decision to kneel by himself. He actually consulted with someone who was a Green Beret, an ex-NFL player, and the decision to kneel was based on the fact that it had more to do with showing deference and respect than just outright just disregard or disrespect. They take a knee when someone gets knighted. You kneel when you propose to a woman or to a man. You kneel when you pray. On the NFL playing field, the players all kneel when there's an injured player down too. They take a knee then. So this is not a sign of disrespect at all. And also, when soldiers go to grave sites, you commonly see soldiers kneel at the side of a fallen brother. So that's just, I'm saying, the message which is kind of hijacked for Cap. I also saw today, I don't know if anybody saw this, that today Kaepernick just signed a deal with Disney. They've just announced it today. So kudos to him. As far as Black Lives Matter, I had written something out, had it all ready. It was all data driven. You know, the things kind of like what the last speaker was just saying, you know, talking about the different disparities. And then I looked at something. I saw a video from last Saturday in Martinez, California, about this couple, this white couple that was painting over a Black Lives Matter sign on a mural. They were painting over with black, and they were yelling this "All Lives Matter" thing. And then that was kind of shocking, but it wasn't that big a deal. But the thing that really got me was when I read the comments about looking at the video, and it's all these things people were saying like, well, Black Lives Matter is racist. You complain about the statues, but then you don't want this, or turnabout's fair play. And then what really brought me back is the question of who really has a more legitimate moral grievance than blacks in America? That's what the question's about. Black Lives Matter came into existence in 2013 because of Trayvon Martin's murder, and that George Zimmerman got off. The goal of Black Lives Matter, if you look at their mission statement, is to eliminate white supremacy, to intervene in violence inflicted on black communities. The fact that some white people are upset at this and refuse to acknowledge these injustices make them also complicit in the problem. Black Lives and other black actor groups are the manifestation of the reality that there is no sense of urgency to eliminate racial injustice by our government. If there is to be justice and equality for black communities, it must be driven by like-minded organizations like Black Lives Matter. Changes are long overdue for this, and history will bear out that meaningful social changes in this country have always followed social unrest, civil disobedience, to expose racism. So, you know, blacks have been really patient for a long time, waiting for the government and everybody else to kind of like make this an equal society, and it's not happening. It's obvious now that no one else has got black interest in heart. Black communities suffer because of it. So, you know, we don't really have to worry about whether or not white lives matter. It's kind of baked into the system. The focus on Black Lives Matter is on Black lives because that is where the most serious injustices are, and therefore they need the most attention and response. And does anyone doubt that if there's true social and economic equity for blacks, that the rest of society would not benefit? The truth is, not until Black Lives Matter do all lives matter. That's all I got to say.
Thank you, Tommy. Great. All right, so we have Josh up next, Josh Bassais.
Hey, Josh Bassais here. So more of a comment and kind of some hopes. I think James mentioned, you know, momentum, and I'm hopeful of that. But I think I've seen this movie before, unfortunately. Personally, I'm a football fan. For me, and maybe some people on the call tonight, football is kind of a family thing. And I remember watching a Vikings game on the north side of Minneapolis with my dad, who passed away at a young age. So very fond memories. You know, my early heroes, you know, were Jim Marshall and Carl Eller, who actually lived on the north side of Minneapolis. He like lived down the street from us and kind of knew my dad, who was just a little 5'6" guy, and Eller was like 6'6" and a very, very gracious and generous man, and really fond memories. And it's still a family thing for me. You know, I have kids of my own, and football is something that we do as a family. But I do kneel with Colin Kapernick. And so it's not even about conflict, it's about anger. It's about frustration, not as a fan, but as a person, as an activist, someone who's, you know, who's worked on the front lines, in particular with the labor movement and locally in my neighborhood. And so what I hope and what I really would like to see in this this potential momentum, and I do believe and I feel like this is different, and I hope that it is that somehow not only Colin Kaepernick, but the NFL, pro athletes can amplify the narrative. Now, we all know that the narrative in this particular issue with kneeling on the sidelines has been hijacked several times, to the point where players weren't kneeling at all last year. You know, it initiated from Mr. Kaepernick and a few players standing by his side, and then you know, other teams and players on their sidelines as well, in honor of Colin and the things that he was trying to communicate. But what have we really taken the next step and amplify that narrative? Have we held sponsorships? Have we held sponsors of the NFL accountable? have the players who support, who make these sponsors, not only NFL but sponsors, billions of dollars, not only on game day but throughout the year. Has there been an expectation set that they support Black lives? And do they support that publicly? Do they support that in their advertising? Do they support that in their advertising during the game? Because you very rarely will see that from Apple, from Microsoft, from Nike. So I think there's a huge, huge disconnect. And if we have the momentum and the voices are loud, I'm going to make an assumption that those corporations might just be listening just a bit. And I'm not talking about boycotting. I'm talking about full-on activism from a corporate standpoint, and that being the expectation. Why can't we have game time PSAs sponsored by the NFL talking about Black lives and the Black Lives Matter movement? Considering the makeup of the NFL. I don't think that's totally unreasonable. Now, from a corporate standpoint, it may be from them, but from the public and from a fan and from citizens of this country, I think it's totally applicable. I think it's the right timing and it's the right thing to do. And frankly, if that doesn't happen, myself and I'm sure many people around the country are just not going to tune in on Sundays and Mondays and Thursdays and lose all that airtime and all that sponsorship and all that money, because ultimately this is a billion-dollar business and ultimately that's what matters. So I hope this is different. I really do. I also spent over a decade in the labor movement. So I really hope that the players come together, and that when Mr. Kaepernick started this, there was just 3 or 4 or 5 players taking a knee. Form some solidarity. Form some solidarity amongst the players. Should there be an expectation from the union to have that negotiated in the next collective bargaining agreement, that at the very least respect and dignity of players protesting on their behalf and the behalf of the citizens of color and police brutality in particular. So I think there's a lot of room for that. And not only that, can we escalate even further? Game stoppages. We just might be late to the game. We might just miss the team bus. We just might not show up at halftime until this issue is fully appreciated, fully supported, not by just the NFL, by the sponsors too. The sponsors that give the NFL billions and billions of dollars. That's my hope. And I hope the momentum is there. And I do feel in my heart, coming from Minneapolis, 3 blocks away from the 5th precinct, from the epicenter of the George Floyd protest, I hope in my heart that that's what we can accomplish. So hell yeah, I deal with Colin Kaepernick. And hell yeah, I'll support the movement. And hell no, will I watch the NFL if they don't get behind it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Josh.
Awesome.
James?
Yeah, who's up next?
Thad Wong.
Okay, yeah, I just want to say, so Thad came in on short notice, and I think, Thad's a childhood friend, but he's also a big, huge Obama supporter, donor, so on and so forth. But anyway, I'll let him tell you about that if he wants to, but I'm just going to leave it there.
Thanks, James. First off, I've learned a lot. I mean, the speakers that I've set up so far have been amazing, and it's been great to hear the passion and the true understanding and the math behind what you guys were talking about in the movement. I've always knelt with Colin Kaepernick. It amazed me, the industry's response. As a business owner, we have to make business decisions that usually involves everything around profitability for shareholders, right? It went from social responsibility back with the Ford car to the sheer focus is profitability for shareholders. So I do understand making business decisions for profitability. What I didn't understand was the business decision by the NFL effectively demonizing Colin Kaepernick for expressing his rights and his freedoms. And especially understanding that the source of their business, I understand the math source, the revenue comes from the fans, but the fans are there to see the players. And I think the NFL had an amazing leadership opportunity that was incredibly lost, because had they turned this into a conversation, and the NFL been in the forefront of pushing for additional civil rights and bringing awareness to the movement that Colin Kaepernick was behind, and Black Lives Matter, and just calling out the reality that is in America, that would have been astounding. And I think they would have been far more profitable because they would have unified the country. It might have been short-term losses. They might have transitioned their fan base into opening up their minds and believing something a little bit differently. They would have definitely lost a few fans, but I do believe in the long run it would have been a far greater decision, especially when they were in the position of having declining attendance and fewer parents wanting their kids to play football for the obvious reasons. But I'll tell you the part that was the strangest to me. I am a big sports fan. I go to a lot of NFL games. I go to a lot of NBA games. I got 4 kids. I take them all to games all the time. It's one of my favorite things to do. And I'm in Chicago. I grew up in Minnesota. So Soldier Field, always at one time in the game, do they bring out a soldier and everybody stands up and cheers. And there are very few things in America that we all universally stand and cheer for, right? I mean, we have a lot of arguments and we have a lot of different sides, but the soldiers effectively that are doing the job that I'm too scared to do, I'll stand up and applaud. My grandfather served, my dad served reluctantly, and I will never, that's not for me. I don't have that confidence. But that's something, a universal thing that you stand for. And what I saw after 16, when Colin kneeled, I saw that the use of the soldier tied to the American flag throughout the game only became more frequent. Up until 20, and every year I come back to Minnesota and I take my mom to a Vikings game. And I went to the Vikings game with my mom and my 2 sons. And I think we stood up for soldiers like 6, 7, 8 times during the game. It was astounding to me. It was ridiculous. To the 6th or 7th time, my kids and I started to laugh. We started thinking like, this is such obvious propaganda used to corral the fans into forcing them to stand. Because what does standing do with the flag? It belittles Colin Kaepernick, right? It belittles his voice. It says, if you stand with Colin, you're not standing up for America. I mean, what do you say to your child, right? I know what I said to my children. I know what way my children feel. But effectively, our children feel effectively what we tell them to feel, and until they're old enough to figure it out for themselves. And when you're standing there up for these soldiers for the 6th, 7th, 8th time, and you know what you're standing for, it's wrong. It doesn't feel good anymore. It feels like you're a pawn, and it feels like the military is a pawn, and it feels terrible. But at the same time, do I have the confidence to kneel and not stand? No, I don't. I do not have that confidence when I'm sitting with my kids to do that in a stadium of 65,000 people. I do not have the confidence that Colin Kaepernick has. Not even close. So I go to the game and I'm a pawn like every other fan. And I think that at the end of the day, I do the best that I can to share my values with my children to make sure that we have a good future, and hopefully they'll do more in this world than I've been able to do. But it doesn't feel good. It does not feel good to not have the confidence to kneel. Because if I did have the confidence, that's what I would be doing. But in doing that, I'd have to be okay with things thrown at me, and I'd have to be okay with the consequences of that. And I don't have that. I don't have that in me. But I was incredibly disappointed the way I felt that the military was used, because, at the end of the day, Colin Kaepernick is like, once in a generation type guy like Muhammad Ali, something that you work your entire life for, and you finally earn it, and you're there and you got it, and you decide to give it up, not necessarily for yourself, but for everyone else, it's amazing. And so I wrote a piece called All Lives Matter, since some of you have been talking about that. It did not get published. I wrote it with a buddy of mine. So since you're here, I'll read it to you since nobody else got to read it. It's titled All Lives Matter. For those of you who don't get why saying all lives matter is racist, consider this. Your father dies, you get the news at work. As you're crying on the way to the bathroom, a colleague asks, "Hey, what's wrong? You okay?" You respond, "I just learned my dad died. Actually, he was murdered." Your colleague pauses, looks at you and says, "Come on now, Thad, get a grip. Don't you know all dads die? Some are even murdered. I mourn for all dead dads. Your dad is just one of them." It's crazy, right? Would never happen, right? And it would never happen because it's so insanely insensitive. As a logical matter, it of course is true. All dads die, and some even by murder. But this is not a logical matter. This is the death of someone's dad. For those who say, but all the people protesting are not related to George Floyd, how about this? You're passionate about rainforests. You go up to a friend and say, "Save the rainforest," and she responds, "That's nice, but aren't forests important?" And so it goes with All Lives Matter. It's incredibly insensitive, and at worst, it's pure racism, whether conscious or not. All Lives Matter is effectively code for saying, I do not recognize you, your pain, or your history. Perhaps it's guilt at play, as recognizing the pain implicitly also requires you to recognize your contribution to the pain, and whoever wants to do that. And to move on towards the end, it says, to extend the analogy and compound the matter, when you return to work, all around you are symbols of your dad's killer. They're all statues of the killer's family, like the hundreds that dot the South. Even a military base is named after the killer's family, just like Fort Bragg is named after a Confederate general. Basically, the landscape is dotted with reminders not of your dad, but of your dad's killer. But no mistake, when someone says all lives matter to a Black person, they are simultaneously screaming, but yours, not so much. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you very much. James, I think that you want to introduce Mr. Burris.
Okay. Yeah. So next up we got Mr. Burris. We have John Burris. Special guest. We wanted to get him on as soon as possible. So Mr. Burris, if you could get to your unmute button. So if you don't know Mr. Burris, what we'd like to point out is that he did try the Rodney King case and Oscar Grant. So he's been on the complete front lines of some of these cultural shifts. And also, let's not forget the Oakland consent decree, the NSA, it's there, but it's been ignored. But I'll let Mr. Burris speak on his own behalf.
I'm unmuted.
We can hear you now.
Yeah.
Okay, good. Thank you, James. This has been a truly enlightening evening. My wife, Cheryl's here. We've been listening to all the points. And I'll tell you that it's heartwarming to hear the thoughtfulness. Many of the young lawyers that I know feel particularly great that their future is in large measure motivated by some of these issues that are confronting us on a daily basis. But when I think of Colin Kapernick, I think of him in the terms of John F. Kennedy's Profile in Courage that I read many years ago. And it takes a person to stand up in the face of mounting odds and say, this is not right, and I'm prepared to make this decision. Colin Kapernick did that. And he's actually in the grand tradition of a lot of other Black athletes. Just, you got to think about Bill Russell and Jim Brown, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, and one that you may not even know much about, and that's Curt Flood. Curt Flood gave up his career as a center fielder for the St. Louis Cardinals to challenge the baseball agency rules. And ultimately, he lost, but the baseball world of athletes prevailed. So there's always been this grand tradition of athletes, not all of them, and you can't ever expect all athletes to stand in with the protest because of a lot of other personal considerations, one of which being money. But to the extent you have a person who does it, it's important to stand with that person or to kneel with him. For me, I don't know the last time I ever stood up for the national anthem. I don't care how many times it's been played. And the reason, Green, is for all the things you guys have said. I don't believe the history of this country is such that African-American men or people in general should feel that they are part of this system in any kind of equality way. Even though, as a lawyer, I'm fighting every day for Black lives and brown lives and white lives. But I recognize that the system itself is geared against them and against me. But that's not a reason not to fight and not a reason to go forward. And as I listen to everyone, all of you have great points and great ideas, and all of which should be implemented in some form. Think about it this way. If this is George Floyd was a moment, a tragic moment, but it enlightened the nation in ways that had never been done before. When I did the Rodney King case, the world was on fire from it. It was an international event, but it didn't go into the streets. It didn't go into the streets of every city. And even though he was beaten unmercifully, and other cases that we've seen down through the years, but I think it's a gradual process. And I'm hopeful now that we have reached past the point where this is just a moment, but now it's a movement. And the movement obviously has to occur in all the cities around the country. We have them constantly going on. But part of the movement is the constant protest, the constant being in the face, the constant making people uncomfortable. Some of the comments that have been said are terrific comments, the kind of things that ought to be done and should be done as it relates to the NFL. I'm not a football person per se. I mean, and so to the extent that what Kaepernick did, I only see it from a political, personal point of view. And politically, it was a wonderful decision. Unfortunately, it did not at the time cause other players to really move in a way that they should have. But at the same time, his movement was hijacked. We all know that by President Trump, who is a master at misdirection. And as a consequence of that, the athletes and the owners did not move in the proper direction. They may never, the owners may never, but the players can. And there is value and uniformity, collectiveness, being willing to stand with each other. And I think if you do that, you can move the NFL in ways that will allow for more protection for the players. The issue of the health of the players is tremendous. And the lack of guaranteed contracts. These are important issues in terms of the playing conditions. Kaepernick has started that, but his movement is far greater than the football field, because the issue of police brutality is nationwide in every city, every hamlet, and having been involved in many of those, I appreciate the call to arms, the call to the attention, but I recognize, and you all know, there are 18,000 police agencies in this country. All of them are governed by their own local rules. And for any of us to make real substantial movement, we have to have people on the ground in those individual places trying to move the social agenda there. We have been able to do that in some places, but at the end of the day, this, I think, is an eye-opener, this movement that has taken place around George Floyd, and there's things we can do. So I want to say to all of us that this is a wonderful event. Many of the ideas that I've heard here are terrific, and it really shows that there are people who are thinking about this. You may not be in the battle and the struggle that James and I and Dante and others are in, but you appreciate the struggle that it is, and to the extent that you can be supportive of that, either by bringing other people along, by going to protest marches, or even attending various political events, it will be most helpful. This can be more than a moment. It can be a movement, and your help and participation is extraordinarily important.
Thank you very much, Mr. Burris.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Burris. That was awesome. So I just want to say I'm really glad to see Alejandro. Man, these comments have been great. So people recording this, keep bringing them just like that, everybody. This is awesome.
All right, we've got Alejandro Vilchez next.
Thank you, Alice. Thank you, James. I'm real honored to be part of this. I'm just a homeboy. I'm not a lawyer, although I play one here at home with my children. Born and bred here in the Bay Area. I'm a son of Cuban immigrant from my dad's side and Mexican from my mom's side. And I apologize. I actually have to get off at 6:30 because everybody's calling me in to eat, and so I hate to hit and run. So just real honored to be part of this distinguished panel. I want to say this, you know, as a brown man, as a Chicano, even though I'm Cuban and Mexican, I identify as Chicano. I could just tell you this. I'll just be honest. You know, I really wasn't down with Colin Kaepernick kneeling. Not because I didn't support his cause. I think for me at the outset, I really wasn't down with how he was doing it. Simply because I just have tremendous respect for the military. I can tell you that since 2016 because I think that's the last time he played, and since the time he's been out of the league, things have shifted for me. But I'm just going to be transparent. I really wasn't down with it, particularly because when I think of kneeling, and I heard Mr. Hoffman's description of kneeling, kneeling is a symbol of submission. And so I think for me, I expected more of a raised fist, similar to the '68 Olympics, which ironically happened in Mexico, when a lot of the brown community has been left out of conversations regarding race. It's always been a black and white issue, and that's a personal thing for me. I'm not from the East Coast, and a lot of conversations regarding race really are driven by kind of East Coast thinking, even though, particularly in the media. So I just want to put that out there. But I can say that there has been a shift as I talk more, not only with my own community, but, you know, with allied communities. And I live in the gentrified part of Menlo Park here on the east side, right next to East Palo Alto. And so I've seen Black and brown and Pacific Islanders just dissipate in terms of numbers and be priced out. And so talking to my colleagues, talking to my neighbors, have really been able to shift. I could tell you, I support Black Lives Matters, but I'm not going to go out there and buy the shirt. That's just not me. Because I'm more into my brown community, and I have to be accountable for my own community before I can go and support BLM. That doesn't mean financially. That doesn't mean I won't protest. Doesn't mean that we don't have the same cause. But I really think that there has to be an accountability within our community. And I'll push a little bit now, because the majority of the people that have been speaking have been Black men, which has been great. But I also want to hear from some of the women. I want to hear also from other communities. We cannot talk about racial reconciliation. We cannot talk about justice until we take some accountability within our own communities. We need to have more conversations about the tensions that happen between Black and brown communities. We're so quick to unite, which is great, out in the streets. When we do Black Lives Matters, when we see young men and young women being killed unjustly, we're quick to do that. But we are very slow to respond when it comes to, you know what, we need to talk about the tensions, the quiet tensions, but the tension is there between the Black and brown community. And I don't see enough of that happening. And I don't know if that's fear, or I don't know if maybe that's not a priority, but that needs to happen more. And so I just want to put that out there. When it comes to Colin Kaepernick, I have shit to. I respect him. I respect for what he does, particularly for the, you know, when he lost all kinds of sponsorships, because you do need to be standing up for something, regardless of the financial attachments or allurements that are associated with it. So I respect him. And as far as his playing ability, I don't expect to see him on the field anytime soon. Football is a game more than the other three sports that you just got to be in tip-top shape. So that's just my personal opinion. I'm a Niner fan, true and true. So forgive me for that, the Minnesota brother that was talking all kinds of smack. But I, on a personal basis, I don't expect him to see on the field, not because of politics, but because of athletic ability. But that's a whole other conversation. I'll finally say this, you know, as far as the protesting and kneeling, I'm a lover of history. And so I just kind of went back to, why is it that we started playing the national anthem at sporting events in the first place? And it was mainly, you know, it goes back to World War I believe World War II, to honor the soldiers, honor the military. And so and I'm a mediator. I'm not a lawyer. I'm a mediator. I do a lot of work in violence prevention with gang members out in the streets, over in the juvenile halls. And so, and I don't want this to be a compromise, but is there a way that we can honor our military and at the same time raise the issue of Black Lives Matter, raise the issue of people who have been unjustly killed by law enforcement? I don't think that they're mutually exclusive. I think that there is a way that we can honor both without it respectfully, and also making sure that everybody's plight is put up there. As far as the plantation mentality of NFL, absolutely. And at some point, if we don't get this right, it is going to be the dissolution of the NFL completely. And perhaps maybe a new league comes up, an all black league or an all black and brown league or an all league that is not controlled by the NFL. So with that, I'll leave you. Thank you for the time. I'm sorry if I went over. I just wanted to put my heart out there.